Hi everyone, my name is Eric and I'm still working on Witcher's Heaven, which, let's see if I can remember the tagline, will be a game about Radical Friends, Infinite Dogs and the end of history. Or something along those lines. Hi, it's been a long time. When I opened up the presentation folder for this video thing, I realized that the last devlog video was in May. And I thought maybe I did one in June, but apparently I didn't. Who knows? I'll see it if once I get around to maybe uploading this video. Anyway, yeah, it's been a while. Things have happened. Life was busy and strange in parts, and there were reasons why I didn't really posted anything because not a lot has happened. Let's talk a little bit about what has happened. Well, last month, what had I planned? Nothing. Like, at least nothing related to Witcher's Heaven. To like talk a little bit about what has happened. Also, like, what did I do? Something. Nothing related to this game, at least. So, just to do a quick update about like what was going on. I like between June and the end of September, I was in a welfare office mandated coaching program for people who don't have jobs to help me figure out if maybe I could get a job in the future, which in some parts was helpful, in other parts was fairly frustrating and annoying. It did help me in like figuring out certain things I want to do and establishing certain like behavioral things and like patterns, and like helped me with reorganizing certain things. So it wasn't that it was like a complete waste of time, but in some parts it was also like fairly stressful for my mental health because being someone who has been without a stable job for like a very long time, and like not for lack of trying in a lot of ways, I compared it to, imagine you have like some kind of open wound, and for like 3 months you're basically pushing against that open wound for like that entire time or like every few days, and you just stay there for like several hours on a day. So it was stressful on that regard. I had some fairly bad mental health days in August, though August is always kind of like an month for me over the last few years. But anyway, I'm done with that part now. Parts of my I organize my days differently. I've modified my scheduling system and all these kinds of things. So to kind of reflect things that I've picked up during that coaching thing and want to continue doing and all that kind of stuff. So that happened, and very early on while I was in that program, I told myself to stop all work on Witcher's Heaven because I was at a point where I was like fairly stressed out about what the game is and how it's been going and all that kind of stuff. And I mean, the last video I uploaded, at least I think, kind of still speaks to that. And since I wasn't really quite sure of like where to take things and how things are going to go and like how much time I would have to actually work on that game, I figured to just take a step back and basically not touch the game for like 3 to 4 months, which I did. But now I'm at a point where I want to figure out and want to understand what I can do with this project, because I'm not in a position where I would feel comfortable just canceling something. I've talked a little bit about that in the past because like the thought of just canceling the game came to my mind quite a lot. But I do not want to basically throw away something that could be used as like several aspects, not like could be used to like express something, and could be very cynically formulated, could be used to earn me some money and all these kinds of things, with like with nothing to show for it. So sometime saying I didn't work on the game is kind of not true, considering that I did spend some time thinking about what I could do with this game once my life kind of turned back towards like me being able to like spend more time and energy on like making video games. So to talk a little bit about that thinking part, and I'll try to remember to put a link to the the blog post that I wrote about that stuff in the YouTube video description, also on the Steam page post that I'll do once everything is done. So in July I wrote something called Metroidvanias Are Hell, and again in a larger sense, Virtuous Heaven is a Metroidvania, though it like does a lot of things not in the way that Metroidvanias usually do these things. And the main gist of that post is that the like Metroidvanias from their outset kind of have an inherent risk of just spiraling out of control when you're making them, because and I compared it to like how I built GB Roba, which is a platformer with linear levels where you have a start point and an end point, and you just fill the stuff in between, and where you don't have to think about, okay, there's like a map that you have to explore, there have to be like branching paths that people can take, there has to be something at the end of these branching paths because, you know, it's exploration, all that kind of stuff. And that's the difference between like making a linear level where like, okay, you run from A to B and you're done, to, okay, you kind of have to run from A to B, but also there are like alternative paths like 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And because, and maybe that's also like a problem on my end, that I just thought every alternative path has to have something at the end of it, otherwise it's kind of weird and frustrating. And kind of like if you think about, or like think about like at least the Metroidvania games that are kind of memorable, most of them have this, right? Where you take an alternative path and oh, there's an upgrade piece, and oh, there's like something else, something that rewards you for taking that path, or like mastering whatever challenge that was in between those. And the problem with like having the and the whole reason why you're making alternative paths is because you want to encourage exploration and like giving players room to use the abilities that they have. And frankly, that's the main reason why I turned Virtuous Heaven into a Metroidvania in that regard, because I had this movement system, which again was the first thing that I've built without really thinking about a game. So I had this movement system, and what I wanted was for people to have space to use that system. And just making a linear platformer kind of like reduces that amount of space where you can use that like quite a lot. And that's also the reason why in Virtuous Heaven the movement system is not like, you're not progressing towards like the full movement system throughout the game. You have it right from the start, because I want people to have space to use these abilities in, and I want to have them as much space as possible. But if you then say, okay, there has to be like a lot of space that you can explore, then okay, there has to be a reason why you're exploring things. So you have to have things that you put at the end of these paths. So you add so that creates the necessity to add more things to it than are maybe needed. You add more like, if you want, for example, you say, okay, there has to be upgrades for them, then there has to be a need for upgrades, right? So you say, okay, health is limited, so that you have health upgrades. You increase enemies, like the health of enemies throughout the game. So there's like a need for damage upgrades, which also kind of forces you to create a more complicated damage formula. It's all stuff that I've done. You create more things that kind of make it, or like create more and additional systems that then give you reasons to like kind of like scatter all these kinds of other upgrades for these explicit systems in them, so that there's more stuff that people can do. And this just creates the risk of things just growing and growing and growing, because the more space you create, the more space there is between these singular elements, and the more spaces in between them, the more there is the need to kind of like break the monotony of just like walking around. So you add more you kind of have to add more boss fights, which means you have to add more boss fights, which is another layer of work. Then the map gets so big that you kind of feel like, oh god, the graphical assets, it's kind of like samey, so you have to add more of those. But that also kind of requires you to maybe add more enemies to them to create more variation. And I'm basically retelling blog posts in a row. This is like the problem. It balloons out, or there's the risk of ballooning out. And I feel that's the reason why a lot of Metroidvanias that are in development take a long time. It's not always the case. There are ways to keep things small and keep things manageable, but I feel this is one of the reasons why most of these forever indie games that exist or have existed are in that genre. If you think about it, if you're like a bit more like, if you spend more time around indie games, or like of my age and have like started following that whole scene since like the late odds or like early 2010s, the most well-known forever game since I started following all that stuff were Owlboy, which was a Metroidvania. I think a game called Hearthforth Alicia at this point, which I think is also Metroidvania, which also hasn't come out. I think Chasm was one of them. Metroidvania with like kind of procedural generation. Iconoclasts, also Metroidvania. And I think I'm forgetting some. Axiom Verge took quite a long time. I think I've heard of that game in early 2012, I would say. It came out in 2014. Might be wrong on that one. And yeah, so quite a lot of them. It's probably like me being a bit, maybe I'm like, this is just like me being a bit very like narrow-minded or focused on these kinds of games. But if you were to look at especially like forever indie games, a lot of them are either weird MMO type games or Metroidvanias. And I think one of the reasons why a lot of them are Metroidvanias is because of the reasons I just described. And especially when you work on your own, this just balloon of stuff you have to makes things so much harder for you, because you have to do all the work. Everything you have, like if you're creating a new system for upgrades, that means you have to create all the assets for it yourself, you have to create all the code for it yourself, you have to create like all the you have to think about where you place them and all that kind of stuff all yourself. And then again, these decisions create further cascading decisions about other things that all mean that you have to do all that extra work, which again, since you cannot work on two things at once because you're just one person, just increases the time frame into infinity. And I think that's, at least looking at things, that's what happened with this game. And that's what I want to try and not do anymore. So, and that's now the weird part, because in a sense, I'm starting not really completely from scratch, because all the assets that I've made still exist, and what you do in the game is still the same. The very basics of the game are still the same. But what I want to do over the remainder of this year is basically put all of these things into a much, much, much tinier space. Kind of. That's the idea I have. So that's like kind of the idea about like finding a way forward, right? Make things small. Figure out, or like that's stuff that I've already done. Figure out what doesn't need to be there. And honestly, most of what the problem was of the previous games is that everything was just too large. Like areas were too big. Like I think at some point I don't know if this was like before May or like in early June, but I think I've built something with the areas that I had, and it was basically to a point where I said, okay, I can walk through it from start to finish, like from the first area down towards the last area. I had everything for it. I had all the assets for it. I had like all the maps built out and all of it, and I played through it, and like in the middle of it, like after like roughly an hour, I just felt tired, because it's just like there's just so much space between things that are happening, and that does not have to be that much space. And again, and the problem in that moment was when you see that much space, you immediately think, oh god, I have to add more boss fights, or otherwise this gets boring. And again, then you have more boss fights. So what are these boss fights for? Do they give you upgrades? What kind of upgrades could they give you? And then again, the spiral starts. When instead what I could do is to just get rid of most of the space, and some of the upgrade stuff that is also not very much needed in the way that does anything to it. So cut down on the useless space, and cut down on basically cut down the amount of alternative parts and exploration down to the stuff that's actually part of the core game, of like what I wanted to do. That's stuff that I actually did every once in a while, like once every few weeks. I took a day out and or a few hours and like tried to figure out how to go forward. And I had like several attempts at this, actually, like several attempts at like figuring out ways on how to put basically the entire game into one map and not like several. And I think I found something, and it's actually something that, I mean, we'll have to see. Should not take that long to assemble in the end. But we'll see. So my plan right now for the rest of the year is take this month, like October, to do one last round of modifications. I'll talk about what that means in a moment. In November, to use November to build the explorable area that I have in mind, and fill it as much as I can with the things that I have. It doesn't have to be finished, it just has to exist. And in December, like, do another pass on the existing boss fights, or add new fights, or take old fights from older games of mine and kind of see if I can repurpose or reuse them. This is like something that is also mentioned further above in that slide. Reuse things wherever possible. Because the good thing, and again, this sounds more cynical than I mean, but in a way it is, the good thing about making games that not a lot of people are buying and playing, like comparatively, it's still like, it's like still like in general, like a few hundred people have played my games, which is kind of cool, but could be a lot more, and in terms of money making should be a lot more to make this actually kind of worthwhile. But anyway, the good thing about having like a comparatively small amount of people playing things is that there's a ton of stuff that I could just reuse and people would not notice it. Doesn't mean that I would copy like things exactly. It's more like taking concepts, updating sprites, and like changing sprites around, so that I don't have to start from zero when I make, for example, make a boss fight, but maybe at like 25 to 30% finished, which again cuts down time. And the more I can cut down the time to make things, the more I can concentrate on actually figuring out ways to make these things interesting for people to engage with. Which again is like a huge problem that the game had, considering like the way the demo was perceived, or the way what I've gathered. Again, folks had an okay time with it, I think, but also I think everything was way too large. So who knows if this fixes things, but that's kind of like the way I want to go about things. And basically, come January, depending on how the next few months go, and this might all change if basically the amount of time I can spend on this changes. This is all under the assumption that I won't find a job in the meantime. I'll try way more active. I'm going to try way more actively to find one, because for just to keep myself occupied with this and connected to that kind of stuff that I picked up during the last few months, but also to kind of like placate the welfare office to leave me alone. Should I find something, obviously the amount of time that I can spend on all this stuff changes dramatically, and I would have to adjust. But like, assuming nothing changes in the amount of time that I can spend on this stuff, I will probably by the end of December have a very good idea of like whether or not this is a project worth pursuing until the end or not. So come January, you will most likely either get news about a likely release date or news about cancellation. That's where I am right now. I want to give myself these next 3 months to really figure out, okay, can I do this? Can I find a way forward with this? Is this concept that I have right now robust enough that it gets me through the end, that it gets this project finished? And is what I have interesting enough for me to consider finishing it? Because if I make something and I play it and I realize this is still like, this is bad, I'll probably not release it. Who knows? But I probably wouldn't want to release it if I wouldn't feel good about it. But yeah, that's the plan. So let's talk a little bit about October and then wrap this up. So what I want to do with like modifications is I want to redo the way, like, not exactly how enemies work or how they behave, but kind of like unify their behaviors and the way everything is handled. Because right now, like, and that's kind of like the result of this being a project that is like way too old, is that like, because I started over like over the last 8 years or so, like several times, like almost as many times as there are years when I started it, I very often said, okay, let's make new enemies, and apply things that I learned in between, while also like other enemies existed that I still kept using. And so it's like a gigantic mess of like different ideas of how to handle enemy behaviors, and it's kind of like, it's hard to maintain, hard to order, and like also hard to figure out when something goes wrong, because like you have to like rifle through very old code and like have to understand what was going on, and so I want to basically both like unify and simplify all of this stuff, and or at least see if I can do that. If I figure out, okay, it wouldn't give me the kind of like things that I would like to add, then I probably won't do it and just leave it as it is. Again, we'll have to see how it goes, but that's basically my plan for like the first part of this month. And what I want to do after that is work on the special ability and upgrade system for the character. This is like very vague, but there's one thing I want to, or basically the two things that are guiding and like giving players special abilities and special attacks. What I want to change how these work in some ways. One system will mostly stay the same. The other one will change quite a lot, and I think it will all make much more sense after I'm done, and it will also add, again, if it works, a nice cool layer of like customability and expressivity again to something. I have to see if it works. Again, that's the idea, and again, I want to only give myself this month and see if I can figure it out. It doesn't have to be perfect at the end of the month, but as long as these things exist and work, and let me keep working on them without having to like do weird hacks and do weird things with them, it's fine. The game doesn't have to be finished by January. It just has to be in a state where I feel, okay, now I can just do the rest of it. I can basically finish the game. I talked about like, okay, now I have to finish the game. That's the plan for like back in May or whatever. I could have basically, I had enough back then to almost finish the game, and as I said, I built everything out from start to finish, where you like walk through all the areas and like do most of the boss fights. Well, no, I could basically, I could almost release that part, and it would be like a sort of finished game, but it would be very bad. So I kind of want to do that, but like in a good way. But that requires these kinds of modifications, because I feel they would genuinely improve what's currently there in a nice way, would fill some things that were always bothering me to a degree, and kind of like also anchor what remains of the upgrade system in good and interesting ways and thematically appropriate ways. So these are all the things that are planned. Who knows how October goes? Again, assuming things stay the same, that's what I plan on doing. However, right now, at least for the first month of October, I'll only have like 3 days per week to work on the Witcher 7, because kind of like as a way to distance myself from this project, I started something else in August, which is like basically the basic version of like an idea for a turn-based strategy system that I had, which at this point is almost finished. I hope it's done in October, but basically right now the plan for me is to take the first half of the week to work on Witcher 7 and take the second half to work on the strategy game until that part is done, and then just do Witcher 7 until either I'm done with it or the game's done. We'll see what happens, I guess. Thank you very much for your attention on this, I guess. Thank you very much for like staying with this project. I did not intend for this to go the direction that it has been going. But again, I kind of just straight on ran into that trap of like the feature creep, while telling myself, oh, I'm cautious with this. I'm cautious with this. I wasn't. But thankfully there is quite a lot of stuff in this game, or like in this project, that I can use and that can be used to make something interesting with it. And that's what I'm going to try to do. There's still a Twitter account mentioned there. I have to change it. Also, it's not called Twitter anymore. Anyway, you could theoretically follow at Mokograd on Twitter. I probably still use that account until that platform doesn't exist. The Mokograd account also has a co-host now that I'll probably put into the presentation now. I've kind of personally, I completely stopped using Twitter. My personal stuff is mostly on co-host at this point. And I'll also kind of intend to kind of shift everything over to there because Twitter is hell. And I hate this place. So that's that part. There's also an email newsletter that who knows I'll use at some point. This is so sad that I still haven't gotten around to that. But ADHD. What can you do? You can be happy if you do 30% of the stuff that you want to do. But it exists. You can also subscribe to the YouTube channel that all of this is hosted on. You can follow the Steam page, or my Steam developer thing to get updates there. You can follow Virtuous Heaven on Steam, which also gets you the upgrades once they happen. Updates, not upgrades. And also you could wishlist Virtuous Heaven on Steam. There might be, wishlisting now might actually be, again, kind of useful because the game is being worked on again. And again, thank you so much for your patience and your, hopefully remaining interest in this. I'll do my best to make something that justifies this interest. Hence all of this hemming and hawing about things. But yeah, I hope you have a nice month. And see you in 4 weeks or so, I hope. Bye.